Welcome to Gateway of Atonement. It's wonderful to be here together with you, learning again. We're just finishing up this section explaining the how-to of Kabbalistic atonement, the how-to of doing atonement according to the Zohar, according to the Arizal, and all the great Kabbalistic thinkers of Jewish history. And we looked at two steps that one has to do in order to achieve atonement. And that is, one, to focus on atonement from God's perspective, And so that means, rather than thinking, oh, I had a bad year, I'm going to get back to God, I'm going to feel so good after Yom Kippur, put it out of the me perspective, put it into God's perspective, and think what I did to that spark of God that's within me, what I did to God's Shekhinah, and in fact, even the hay of God's name, which I dislocated, I caused a rupture in God's name based on my sins, because I am connected to that. My soul is an actual piece of that. And then B, we're going to do a similar meditation, but this is actually to break our heart, to make sure that this really sinks in. And there we're asked, the Alter Rebbe says, we want to be a master of accounting. We want to be really take stock of everything we've done in the past year. And that should break our heart to the extent that this sinks in and it really changes who I am. Now, at the end of this chapter, we're on the bottom of 256, and the Alter Rebbe raises one last question about this technique, and that is, if I'm a person who perhaps lives a life where I pretty much do all the mitzvahs, I pretty much avoid any avera, I feel like I'm really an A-plus, practitioner, so to speak. Maybe I feel like this doesn't apply to me. Maybe I look at this and I say, when's the last time I did a sin that would cut my soul off from God? This is for other people, not for me. So lest anyone in the world think that they're in that category, the Alter Rebbe now has this last section where he says, even if you didn't do one of these big averas like eating chametz on Pesach, which is coming up, still many small sins can have exact same effect as a big sin. Many small sins can have the exact same effect. And he likens it to curtains that might block out the sun. You could go to a nice hotel and get a beautiful sun-blocking curtain that pretty much makes your room dark, and that's excellent. That's a big, thick avera. But you could also take thin, wispy curtains and pile many, 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 many of them on top of the window until you have a few feet of curtains, and that will even more effectively block the sun completely. So we shouldn't think that just because we've only done, so to speak, small averas, that we're in any different category. They can function just as well. And he also likens it to a rope, where when you do any small avera, although you haven't completely severed your connection with the Ein Sof, you've definitely damaged a strand. And if you do another and another and another, we all know I can just as effectively ruin a rope and cut it off by snipping each strand individually as I can by hacking the whole thing off at once. So two beautiful images for us to focus on in case any of us is in this category. I'm certainly not, where you can't think back and think, okay, I messed up here, I fell short there. That's for them. And then he moved on to say, if that's the case about all small averas, now think about the small, quote unquote, averas that the Jewish tradition has likened to as bad as the big ones, as bad as idolatry. And we left off when he was bringing up ignoring the needy, and we'll get to some others. So starting at the bottom of 256 in the Tanya, in this edition, Umikol sheken hamefursamot midivrei Rabbeinu zichronam livracha shehen mamash kavodah zara v'gilui arayot u'shfichut damim.
And certainly with those sins that our sages often warned against, that are actually like idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed.
So if you feel like, well, I didn't do any big averas, the Alter Rebbe says, well, according to Judaism, these small, quote unquote, averas are as bad as idolatry, immorality, bloodshed, as having an affair, as murdering someone. Oy vavoy, what are they? Kmo Ha'alamat ayin min hatzedakah. Let's go ahead with Linda, if you go ahead.
For example, ignoring the needy. Do you want me to do the next part too?
I'll do it with you. Kmo shekatuv, yishamer lecha penye davar im levavcha bil ya'al v'gomer.
Concerning which scripture writes, beware lest there be in your heart something unworthy.
Right. So here, how many times in a busy city does one perhaps walk by someone sitting on the ground saying, please, can I have some spare change or a few dollars or whatnot? And maybe we're just busy. Maybe we don't want to be bothered. Maybe for whatever reason, we could, but we don't. That actually is considered as bad as idolatry. It's as bad as idolatry. As Jews, we have an obligation, if we're able to, when someone asks us to provide a certain amount, doesn't mean you empty your wallet, doesn't mean you leave yourself obviously with no means to take care of yourself or your family. But if someone asks, you can, and there's strategies to do it. When I'm at the Kotel, there's often needy people coming around and people have a budget and they change it into small coins. They leave it on the shender, and people that come around, you give one to each so that you fulfill that mitzvah as well as you can. When you're out, you're out. If you have no money, you can't give it. But that really is something that if you think about perhaps your past year, especially if you live in LA, New York, Chicago, Toronto, a busy city, many of us just don't think about it and sometimes give, sometimes don't. Each time someone asked us and we could have given and didn't, now that is like idolatry according to some opinions, and think about what that does to our connection with God. And again, this is not to drive us all crazy. This is really in the context of I'm trying to now break my heart and impress on myself how many times I could have done something amazing. And in fact, I turned it around. I used that moment to cut off my connection to God. When I realized the immensity of that, of the opportunities I had and what I missed, that'll break my heart at least a little. And that's going to allow for tshuva, maybe more than a little. Uvlial hi oved avodat elilim v'chulu. Let's go on. Stuart, go ahead.
Belial,
Mm-hmm.
here translated unworthy, is used in reference to idolatry, from which we learn that ignoring the needy is likened to idolatry.
Right, so
Okay.
Bilial is related to Bliol, without the yoke of heaven. So in that case, if I walk by somebody that needs money and had $1 in my pocket and just neglected to give it, I'm now a person that has thrown off the yoke of heaven.
Oh, boy.
I know.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions on that, because I seem to remember reading that if you don't give charity because you think that someone is just using it, let's say, for the drug habit or continue that instead, but you're giving to other charities that you think are really worthy, that's sinful? Because you see a lot of people that you
I hear the question. It's a good question. I got it, Stuart. I got it. Yeah. So we're having this conversation in the context of right now I'm by myself. I'm trying to engage in tshuva. I'm finding there's something in the way, which is my own ego, my own sense that I think I did Judaism pretty well this year, and this doesn't apply to me. And so I'm not exactly, my heart's not breaking and shivering with like, oi, have I messed up? So the Alter Rebbe is now giving us tools to try and reach our heart. So this isn't actually a conversation about how I should behave when I'm out in the world and how I should give tzedakah. This is, in retrospect, a conversation about how I can try to open up my heart to the process of tshuva by exploring the technical and even spiritual realities of perhaps ways that I may have messed up, right? So if we're having a conversation about how to actually give tzedakah, that's 100% true, right? If I see somebody and I get the feeling this $20 is not going to help them, but is going to go to some habit, it's my discretion to give tzedakah as effectively as possible and to give to an organization that will help people rather than to give to a person that I suspect it will actually harm, right? So that's completely valid. Also, there's a 10% minimum. Once I've given the 10%, now I've given my tzedakah. There's a 15% maximum in most cases. So sorry, 15 and 20 or 10, 15? All right, let's go with 10 and 15. I may have gotten the numbers mixed up.
Okay, I didn't know
Once
there's a
I've-
maximum.
Yeah, once I've given that maximum amount, now the rest of my money I'm supposed to keep to do good things for my family, build a life. So you're not obligated to give all your money to charity just because you're walking around a busy city and every day people are asking. Those two things notwithstanding, I'm pretty confident that everybody in any one of those major cities could look back at a year and say, even though I was a real master of charity, I gave to important organizations, I thought carefully, everyone that I thought could use it when I could, I gave. I'm sure we could all find many, many times when I just kind of was too busy and walked by or couldn't deal with it that day or what have you. And so that's like I said, that's not a tool for us to drive ourselves crazy with how we actually give tzedakah, because you got to live a life. But it's a tool in this case to work towards complete tshuva by saying, I'm not going to let myself off the hook. I'm going to look at every time when I cut off my connection with God, and that's going to break my heart. Does that answer all your questions, Stuart?
Yeah. So basically, Tanya, this whole Tanya is not so much exactly what you do in life, but lessons on how to make yourself humble.
This section of the Tanya right now is that. If we go back to, of course, the main section of the Tanya, how to be a Beinoni, that very much is how to live your life, where he said your mind controls your heart and you don't do any averas and you do every mitzvah, and that every one of us could do immediately by controlling our heart with our mind. So other sections of the Tanya for sure are very practical, but this one is about atonement, and it's an emotional process, and it's a reframing process. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Does that answer everybody's questions? I know last class we had a little revolution around this line, and people felt it was unfair or problematic. So any other thoughts we hadn't covered?
I'm good.
Good. I'll take that as a good.
Oh yeah.
And if you thought that was problematic, how about the next line? V'hamisaper bignut chaviro hi lashon hara hashkula ka'avodah zara v'gilui arayot u'shfichut damim. Let's finish off on screen. Paula, would you like to finish that paragraph for us?
Yes, or tale bearing, the evil tongue, that is equated to idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed.
And let's you and I go on. V'chol hakoes ki'ilu oved avodah zara.
Likewise, the vile-tempered is like the idolatrous,
V'chein mi sheyesh bo gasut haruach.
and so is the arrogant.
V'chahena rabot b'gemara.
There are many such cases described in the Talmud of sins whose punishment is not as severe as that of idolatry and the like, but which nonetheless affect a similar spiritual blemish.
So these things now, if you thought giving charity to everybody that asks when you can is tough, think about never speaking about anyone else other than absolutely saying positive things.
I'd be in
Right.
trouble.
That's what pardon me. That's what the commandment to not lashon hara, the commandment lashon hara, really at its core is not just about not saying nasty things or untrue things about somebody. It's actually about never saying anything, even a neutral, random story about someone else. And certainly, if something is true and it's just kind of fun, like, oh, hey, did you hear what happened to this person? That 100% is forbidden. And I think that's probably 10 to 20% of the entire conversations that we have in the country is like, well, listen to this and that. You are not allowed to do that. That is actually a halakhic avera. You're breaking Jewish law. And so for anyone who feels like, they've maxed out on the technical side of keeping Jewish practice, just get started on Lashon Hara and see if you can control that muscle between your and you'll see it's a very common thing for us to just, relate something that happened or take a little pleasure in joking about something or things that are true, not even not true, let alone things that aren't true, let alone things that aren't true that are damaging. So that one, a person could sit and absolutely break their heart looking at each instance over the past year where they allowed themselves to do that and think that was cutting off my connection from God. That was as bad as idolatry. And again, we're not trying to drive ourselves crazy day to day, right? Well, we're human. Sometimes you do talk about someone else, and that's what tshuva is for. That's fine. But in the context of trying to break my heart, you don't let yourself off the hook at all. You keep working on this and you meditate on this until you really feel like you messed up and your heart is broken. And the same with anger, and the same with arrogance. So, here I am, I'm at the end, I've gone through, regular sins are like, no, I didn't do those. That's not for me. And then I went through ignoring the needy and like, no, I give to everybody. That one didn't catch me. And then you do talebearing. You're like, no, my tongue is completely under my control. I'm a master even of something as difficult as that. And then finally, the Alter Rebbe says, well, if none of those, if you never got angry, if you never spoke improperly about someone, if you gave to every person, probably your sin is arrogance. Because you think you're so good, you got everything right. You're definitely an arrogant person, says the Alter Rebbe. So let's focus on that, because if you're arrogant, that is just as damaging as idol worship, because we said God can't dwell within an arrogant person. You've cut yourself off completely from God. So I think anyone that genuinely looks at themselves with these tools and meditates is going to find that they've fallen short, is going to find that no matter what, they have something to meditate on to really put their heart in that state. And that is the last step of tshuva. First, getting in touch with how it affected God by my actions, and then B, breaking my heart so that it really affects me and makes an imprint. So any questions in terms of the process of tshuva here? Any questions so far on this? We're close to wrapping up this topic, this section, and moving on to.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you're saying that it's an avera even to say something neutral about someone?
Correct. That is actually halakha. That is not just the Baal Shem Tov is like, people think that Lashon Hara is saying bad things, but I'm going to say by Hasidus and Kabbalah that that's actually halakha.
Even saying good things.
Even saying good things. What was the example that somebody said, no, I didn't write that. It was a get. And his father said, no, the tailor wrote it. And his father said, distance yourself from Lashon Hara. And the guy's like, what do you do? You're asking me that I make a mistake on a get. And I'm saying, I didn't write the get. Somebody else wrote it. Like, I'm just giving you the facts. And what are you supposed to say? That I wrote the get? That's not even true. And his father says, a sage should never do Lashon Hara. Don't tell me that you didn't write the get and the tailor
There's
wrote
an
it.
example
Yeah.
in the Talmud.
Okay.
Where two men are talking, they're in front of a wealthy man's house.
Yeah.
And they're talking, they're saying, well, there's a big fire going in the man's house and he must be preparing a big meal.
Yeah.
And he must be very wealthy because there's this wonderful meal being prepared. And there's a thief that walks by and goes and robs the man's house because these two said he was wealthy.
Right.
So you're not even supposed to say anything nice about
Right.
somebody.
Look here, look at
because you
look at
don't know.
Smolash. He's doing so well. He's going to have lots of people and feed them. He's such a generous person. It's definitely neutral things. You're supposed to avoid speaking about somebody else. You could say to them, if I'm here, someone could say to me, oh, I'm so happy that you're doing so well. You're having a nice, say to the person, but to talk about someone when they're not there, neutral things is breaking Lashon Hara. Yes.
Right.
It's mind-boggling to think that you could live like that. I believe some people do.
I don't believe anybody does.
Yeah, we can at least aspire to it, right? And doing less of it creates a lot of good, according to Judaism. Just even doing less of it, and going on. And if that wasn't enough, we always have the straw that breaks this camel's back in terms of splintering your heart. The Talmud Torah keneged kulam, right? Go ahead.
And the sin of neglecting the study of the Torah equals them all.
K'mama Rabbeinu Zivchem Livracha v'iter Hakadosh Baruch Hu al avodah zarah v'chulu.
As our sages assert, God has overlooked idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed, but has not overlooked the sin of neglecting Torah study.
right? So if there was 10 minutes this year when I had the energy to learn Torah, but instead decided to relax, not to recharge, to learn more Torah, now those 10 minutes, I could take them, I could say, that actually includes all those other averas combined, and look how I've let God down and I've cut myself from God. God gave me this opportunity to be a soul and a body. I could have accomplished and brought infinite light into the world in those 10 minutes. And instead, I neglected that. I nullified that Torah, and that's equal to all the other sins combined. So you can keep going and going and going. As I say ad nauseum, not to drive yourself crazy. We don't want to become neurotic,
Crazy
bean counters about our actions in the world. But again, when I'm sitting trying to really complete my tshuva, that's the opportunity to go deep and really meditate on all the Torah that I've neglected studying. Oy vavoy. We did Kamamar? I think we did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go on to a very interesting text that I'm not sure many Reform Jews have encountered. I'll say I do include it in my bedtime Shema. So I'm going to put it up on the screen here so you could take a screenshot and have it with you as we're discussing it if you want. Oop, my screen sharing is a little. Okay, everybody sees this bedtime Shema?
Yes.
Yeah. So here's a text. If you want to take a screenshot, whatever is Control-Command-3 on my Mac or whatever it is, grab a screenshot of this because we're going to be discussing this. This is a text that is part of the bedtime Shema in the Siddur that I use. And you're going to see here, there are 4 sections of this piece. And each one of them specifically talks about one mitzvah that perhaps we fell short on, and it connects it to one of the letters of God's name. Pardon me. There's God's name there for you. One of the letters of God's name, and also connects it to one of the punishments, because there were 4 types of executions that the Sanhedrin would have to mete out if someone had been convicted of a sin. Yeah, you got it here.
Okay.
So here's, may it be your will. I'll read one of them so we kind of get a sense. I keep doing that. So may it be your will, Lord our God and God of our fathers, that if I have erred, sinned, and willfully transgressed before you and caused a defect in the letter Yud of your great name, I'll call it Havaya, by neglecting Kriyat Shema and letter Aleph of the name Adonai, and I've incurred the penalty of lapidation and the like, and now it's getting cut off. I hereby accept, sorry, I've got something in, I don't know how to move this over. Can I slide that? There you go. And the like in your righteous court, I hereby accept lapidation, stoning, and I am as if I have been stoned by means of the letter Aleph of the name Adonai in the great court of Jerusalem for the sake of the glory of your name. Right? And they call it, right? There's the name Adonai and there's also the name Havaya, right? So we're going to focus on the name Havaya. So each one of these talks about a particular mitzvah that you might have sinned, a particular letter of God's name and Adonai, and then a punishment, right? So to go through, the first one is neglecting the reading of Shema. So I missed the Shema, or said it wrong, or said it without focusing. That's as if I caused a defect in the letter Yud of Havaya. And what happens? That means I should be stoned. And then the second piece says, if I have sinned and transgressed in the defect of the first hay, that's the higher hay, by neglecting tefillin, right? So we if you could wear them or you missed them or they had a defect, then I'm going to accept burning. The third one, if I've erred and caused a defect in the letter Vav of Havaya, so the third letter, by neglecting tzitzit. I walked around and my tzitzit were torn or something. Then I accept decapitation by the sword, kaya, like that.
Ooh.
I know. My son and I always love discussing these, the various, oops. Goodness. I need a manager here. And finally, if I've erred, the last one caused a defect in the final hay by neglecting prayers. I should have prayed better or deeper or more thoroughly. Then I'm going to cause a defect in the last hay. And what will I accept? Strangulation.
Oh,
I know, very, very dramatic.
Yeah, those were the 4 punishments that they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, why does the Alter Rebbe put this in, right? For this reason, he says, let's do the next paragraph. V'lachen sivru b'kriyat shema she'al hamita lekabel alav daled mitot beit din v'chulu. Let's go again, start with Doreen.
For this, for this reason, it was ordained that in the course of the Kiryat Shema at the bedside, one should accept the 4 executions of the court, and so on.
Right. So on the first hand, the Alter Rebbe is now backing up his statement that everybody has cut themselves off from God one way or another. I says, you need proof? Why is it that everybody, even Tzaddikim, everybody, even Beinanim, even pious Jews, we all have to say the Kriyat Shema at bedtime, and we all have to say, I accept upon myself stoning, I accept upon myself burning, I accept upon myself decapitation, right? What? Because we didn't sin, that's what we did? Because we did. The reason everyone has to is because at least by neglecting Torah study, or at least by a little bit of Lashon Hara or something, or a moment of arrogance, all of us have done this, and therefore all of us need to spiritually accept these punishments to cleanse our soul through the process of nightly tshuva, And then he goes on to say, and let me just, we got some static here. Let me just go to the gallery for 1 second. Good. And when we start learning this, sometimes we look at the vast array of Jewish practices and Jewish texts, and we think, okay, it's so complicated. There's so many traditions, and this one came from here and that from there, and you're just learning random stuff, and it's all kind of piecemeal, right? That's the feeling, I think, for anyone who starts to learn, and there's Torah and Gemara and Midrash, and you start to pray, and there's this liturgy and that liturgy and this service and that, and there's Hebrew and Aramaic. But when you go deeper, when you go into Kabbalah and you start to see where everything stems from, and that it really is like one living being, Jewish practice, then you start to see as much structure everywhere you look as you would in the body of a human being, right? My DNA is the same in my fingertip as it is in my brain, right? And the structure of the whole body, wherever you look, is all interwoven and inter-included and working with every other part of my body. And the same thing here. Why is it that the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, had 4 methods of execution? It wasn't just random, like they picked 4. It was based on that when we do any Avera, what's actually happening is we're causing a defect in our connection with God, and we're causing a defect in one of the 4 letters of God's name. And so because there's 4 categories of how we can affect God's name, the Yud, the Hey, and the Vav, and the Hey, there are 4 ways of correcting that. And we'll see as we go through them that each one actually relates to that letter and that mitzvah that I somehow neglected. So it's not just a random court that just historically picked 4 good ways of executing, and some of them were harsher than others, and it was a system of justice somebody randomly worked out. It really was a system of repairing Jewish souls and reconnecting them to God, because when I do this at bedtime, it reconnects me with God. And ultimately, and this is for another class, but ultimately, even capital punishment, which was very rarely meted out, right? Once every 7 years was considered a what was the term?
Once every 70 years.
Oh, I'm remembering 7. A single court that committed someone.
Considered a killer court.
Killer court is fine. Yeah. So this was not happening like every month or even every year. This is a very rare thing, and there were safeguards around, just executing people. But when it was the case that somebody really was warned and went ahead and did a sin and did it fully and did it knowing that they were going to be executed for it, and it was proven and there was nobody to contradict, etc., and they actually executed someone, the idea was that journey of that soul and that body had reached such a dead end that it was just downhill from there. And that allowing that soul to continue its journey in that body was just going to further damage the larger journey of that soul through perhaps many lifetimes. And so the best way to reconnect that soul with God was just to hit end of, hit stop on the playlist and stop the damage that was being done. And the execution was actually a way of reconnecting, cleansing the soul. I know that's That's a very non-modern idea, but that's as far as it goes. Yeah.
So I have two questions. These are pretty extreme. And if you allow that to happen to you, you're not going to be able to come back from burning was they would put hot oil down your throat. So you can't come back from that.
Well, you can't come back from that in this life.
Oh.
Yeah, in this life.
Question.
So the question
Also,
was,
what do women do? Because none of these things in the Kriyat Shema apply to women wearing tzitzit or tefillin.
well, each one is a category. And so any sin that anyone does is connected to one of these in one way or another.
But I'm saying you can't say you can't do the Kriyat Shema because you're not wearing tefillin, you're not wearing talit.
Yes,
So
but
what is a
someone that
woman
was more knowledgeable could take any Avera and say that really fits into this category. That's also the Vav or the Hey. I wouldn't be able to go through all 630 commandments and the roles of men and women, but everything fits into one of these four categories in terms of the connection to the letter.
But he doesn't talk about that.
Yeah, here, the bedtime Shema is definitely traditionally for, the male practice, and women say it. But, obviously wearing tefillin, that's traditionally more of a male thing, although women can
I
halachically.
know, but at that
But,
time.
Yeah. Now, Rashi's,
Yeah.
but now we're going astray. So let's start to go through. And the beauty of it to me is not in the details, but the beauty is even in methods of execution that we think of as so sort of far from our minds and so crazy, this was actually based on our spiritual connection with the four-letter name of God and the Kabbalistic understanding that we had caused a defect in a letter and there was a way to repair it. So let's go through. And I think as we go through, you'll see that it's not just someone's imagination that it matches with four letters of names God. So here he goes, milvad, besides, she'al pi hasod kol hapogem be'ot yud shel shem havaya ki'ilu nitchayev skila. Let's continue. I think we're with Linda, maybe.
Besides, according to Sod, the mystical dimension of the Torah causing a defect in the Yud of the Tetragrammaton is like incurring lapidation.
So why this, right? The Yud in the name of God, and here let me just share one more time for anyone that may not be familiar with the name of God. Here, so here you have the four-letter name of God before we cause any defect in it. So we've got a Yud here, a Hey, the first Hey, a Vav, and then a second Hey. And very quickly, as we've discussed many times, the Yud represents that first spark of Chokhmah in my consciousness, where something that was outside of my awareness comes into my awareness. So the first aha of any realization of any phenomenon, right? It might be a new idea, might be something about a relationship, it might be a new experience, but it all starts in my consciousness with, this is something new. It comes as a spark, and then it expands later on. And that's the first Hey is that expansion intellectually. Then I get feelings about it. That's the Vav, which takes the Yud and stretches it down to the realm of emotions. And then finally, the last Hey expands it to thought, speech, and action. So expands it yet again from emotions into expression. So that we spent months just going over that, but just to review that. So if I have a defect in that intellect, in that spark of Chokhmah, what does that mean? It means that now I'm not receptive to God, right? The Yud is getting myself out of the way so that I'm receptive to something outside myself and some spark of divine knowledge can enter into my consciousness. If I create a defect in the Yud, now I'm numb, I'm dull, I'm not receptive to consciousness. I'm now full of myself and not open, not empty enough to do that. So I'm like a stone, right? I like a stone. I can't receive that. I'm not subtle and receptive. I'm just dull. I'm like a stone, and it's not getting through to me even to begin with. And so because I become like a stone, now the solution is stoning, and that will repair my relationship with the letter Yud. 2. והפוגם באות ה' כאילו נתחייב שריפה ואות ו' כאילו נתחייב הרג. Let's go ahead with Stuart. You may be muted. Let me check where you're at. Thanks.
Okay, I'm back. So, I'm sorry.
Causing.
The causing a defect in the hay, or
Yeah.
causing a defect in the hay is like incurring burning.
And then- Yeah.
Causing a defect in the valve is like incurring the sword.
Very good. So now how do these relate? If I cause a defect in the hay, that means I've used my conscious mind. So the yud is like the first spark of awareness that comes from the superconscious. The hay is more bina, which is conscious cogitation. So I've used my mind to focus on inappropriate things. Therefore, my emotions start to be on fire for those inappropriate things. And my whole system is now on fire for, I want to steal or I want to whatever. And therefore, the solution is burning because when I use my mind to focus on the inappropriate, I burn for a desire for that. So now I'm executed by burning. And then how does the sword work? The sword is vav, which is actually your emotions. So once your emotions get attached now to something that is inappropriate, and I'm you name it, right? And that's become part of me. Now I basically lose access to my head. My head should be there to think right from wrong, to think what should I do. And once my emotions have taken control and my vav is running the show and connected to something inappropriate, I basically have lost the connection to my head. My head is gone. Therefore, decapitation, we cut off someone's head, and that on a soul level will repair what's going on. If on a physical level, it ends what's going on. And finally, let's go, Paula. And you want to unmute, of course. And we're top of 259.
Okay. And causing a defect in the letter hey is like incurring strangulation. I mean,
there it's a little intuitive, right? Hey is expression or speech in particular. And so if I use my speech improperly, my speech is what's now gotten me to the point where I'm completely disconnected from God and there's a point of no return. So now strangulation is ending speech, is affecting speech. So each one of these really lines up and addresses the issue with the letter in God's name that I have neglected, and so to speak, repairs it with like curing like, just like in homeopathy. And you really keep going through and look at everything, look at the mitzvahs we're talking about, and everything really lines up because it is all flowing out, right? The understanding here is that we are the best reflection of God that's in the universe. And so everything about us is a reflection of God's structure, even to the point of the executions. And to get back to the positive, while it's gruesome to think about this as actual executions, we have the wonderful opportunity that when I'm a soul back in heaven, I can't do tshuva. I can't get closer to God. I can't say I'm sorry and God forgives me and now I meet God in God's essence and we're even closer than before. That kind of leap is impossible. Every single night I have that opportunity. Every single day I've gone through and a bunch of these things guarantee I've done. I'll speak for myself. And every night I have the opportunity to sit and say, oi, this day could have gone a lot better. You know, I should have been a better messenger of what God sent me here to do. And so I can break my heart and then I can really accept these punishments on myself. And by accepting them spiritually, I have a mini version of what this does. And for that day, I've repaired my defects in the various letters of God's name. And as a result, my soul leaps up to be closer and higher to God in a way that is inaccessible, inconceivable when I'm a soul in heaven. It's a big opportunity to be able to have a physical body that can mess up and then say, I'm sorry. And then your soul leaps up to a much higher place. So this is not here to make us feel horrible and guilty. It's here to give us access to this amazing opportunity that is tshuva. Let's wrap up this page and we'll start chapter 8 next week. והמבטל קריאת שמע פוגם באות י' ותפילין באות ה' וציצית באות ו' ותפילה באות ה' וכו'. Go ahead, Noreen.
Neglecting Shema pairs the Yud and Tefillin the Hey.
at tzitzit.
And tzitzit, the vav, in prayer, the latter hay, and so on.
Right. And if the connections are not clear, right, the Shema is about us recognizing God is one in every direction, everywhere. That's receptivity to God. So if I'm not serious about the Shema and integrate it, now I won't be receptive, and that'll make me like a stone, right? Tefillin is what takes that and actually literally directs it down with those straps and wraps it around my arm to connect it to my emotions, right? So tefillin is like taking your bina and trying to keep your emotions in check and keep them from getting on fire for the wrong thing. Tzitzit now is really, again, like a vav. That's my emotional connection to the mitzvahs, and they even hang down like the vav so beautifully. And obviously prayer is expression, hay is expression. So those two go together beautifully. So the mitzvahs line up, the methods of execution line up, the letters of God's name line up, and it's all there really to give me access to something even above the yud of God's name, as we'll discuss next chapter. Go ahead, Nori.
From this, I think a man can infer for other sins and transgressions. The Rabbi adds which one of the letters of the Tetragrammaton they are related to, and thus to which manner of execution. And for the sin of neglecting the study of Torah, which is equivalent to them all.
Right, so this actually answers your question. What about the other mitzvahs? It says, from this you can infer from other sins and transgressions, and every one, a person that's more thinking than me could say, this fits into this relates to this. It's four categories that affect God's name in different ways. So it all falls in. And that completes the 2 steps of actually accomplishing tshuva according to the Bala Tanya. So to review, we started with a meditation where we said, don't imagine that tshuva is about me and me becoming a better Jew and me feeling like I've wiped my slate clean and feeling all good. Instead, meditate. It's like I took God's face and God said, go ahead. I'm going to give you full control. And I said, okay, I took the face and I put God's face right in a sewer full of waste, right? And I took my soul and I plunged from the very highest peak, which is an actual piece of God, to the lowest place in the universe. And I cut my soul off from Hashem. So see it from God's perspective, and God's going, Smolash, I put my trust in you. I had faith in you, and you, and now I'm here in exile. And even light sins had the same effect, even if there's no halachic punishment, right? Even if there's no halachic punishment, right? If I'm living a very, call it a frum life, and I'm really careful about sins where there's a halachic punishment, I'm cut off. The Alter Rebbe went through and said, you know what? What's the punishment for Lashon Hara? Right? See, if someone brings me to the Sanhedrin and says, Smolash told a neutral story about me, and his soul is being cut off from God. Sanhedrin says, okay, that's on him. There's no punishment. There's no halachic obligation for him to do something, right? So even light sins that have no halachic punishment, they still just as effectively cut me off from God. I shouldn't feel like I'm outside that. And many sins, even the little light ones, could add up to one huge one. And we should break our heart by realizing the severity of what we've done. And we have many, many tools we find that's difficult. So I invite everyone, not just as we get closer to the summer and we start to get preparations for Rosh Hashanah as we're in that stage of the year. But even just tonight, when I sit down, if I just say the Shema and take a moment and go through my day, that gives us access to this tremendous opportunity that is tshuva, this tremendous opportunity to elevate my soul and my whole environment. So any questions, anything from chapter 8 before we wrap up here?
So if you're doing this at night and you're realizing that, I have sinned in this way, nobody's going to strangle you, nobody's hurting you, but is this basically
My little blanket up and take a little rest.
way so that you realize the
My
severity?
little tent here.
Is that?
Yes, that's
how
exactly
you
it.
use it?
And also, there is a spiritual dynamic where when you say, I accept that on me, in the spiritual, it actually has a dynamic effect. So it's it's to make it real for my heart, so that it's genuine, but it also is actually a purifying and fixing and cleansing effect to accept it on myself, because my soul does experience on some level that the spiritual aspect of that punishment, which is basically wiping away the schmutz on my soul. So if I was a very spiritual person, I could somehow see, on this level of my soul, I'm disconnected to this letter of God's name, and now I've done it, and I see the light that's purifying it, and the schmutz is gone, and things are restored. If you're not a spiritual person, you might have a sense of, maybe an inner sense of wellness and goodness that you did something. But the Alter Rebbe is saying it definitely has an effect on the spiritual level. So it is not just to inspire my emotions, which is good. It is also spiritually dynamic to say, I now accept on myself this punishment.
I have a comment, Eleanor.
Go ahead. I love your scenery there.
Oh, the ice storm, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, beautiful.
That's what
Maybe not convenient. Okay.
Yeah. It's a take on the wearing of the tefillin and the tzitzis, because you described putting it on your head and then wrapping it around your arm and how it connected to God. Maybe God felt that women could connect to God without having those symbols.
For sure, that's a widely understood concept, and I try not to rely on that, because some people hear it as sort of apologetics. But
Well, I don't.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true and genuine that there's a reason why men need to go find a minyan to pray and women don't. It's because women just are always in community, naturally formed community. Men would tend to just sit by themselves and not do that. So, men tend to be commanded to go create community in an organized way. And also men, women are, I think, by nature intrinsically connected to reality and something bigger than themselves, and men tend to get lost in stuff rather than people. And so I think it's a good thing to bring men up to that level, to have actual physical things to remind them that this is all about God and all about connecting and helping other people outside of ourselves. So certainly that's understood, and also I think effective. I think it's a good tool for folks, for men to bring into their lives here in their foreign community, because it does have that effect. It does give me 10 or 20 minutes in the morning to focus on something and an anchor for the rest of the day. All right. One last comment or question, Stuart.
Okay, on those things that were, punishable, like not having tzitzis or tefillin, but then that'd be Orthodox practice that, but usually Reform do not necessarily.
Yeah, so as I said, we have a different approach to halakha in general. So, it may be that we could look at this and say, well, if I don't do 50% of the stuff the Alter Rebbe is talking about, then I can't really use this chapter. It doesn't apply to me. Either I'm just hopelessly lost, or it's not inspiring me because it doesn't really bother me. As a Reformed Jew, I don't take it on myself to have to do X, Y, and Z. So how does this affect me? And my suggestion, I did share at the beginning, and I'll repeat now, is I do think these tools are tremendously helpful for progressive Jews. And my suggestion, which is what I do, is I make categories, and I say, for the category of Jewish practices that I, as a Reformed Jew, have taken on, I'm going to apply this strategy, which means if my Shabbat looks like I turn my cell phone off and I don't use it till Saturday night, but other things maybe that traditionally are required, I don't do. Okay, good. And so that's my Shabbat. Now, if I lost my patience and picked it up before the end of Shabbat, or if it was beeping at me and I just pressed a few buttons to make sure, now I've transgressed my Reform definition of Shabbat. And now this chapter can come into play and help me just as much as it can help someone in their Reform community who's defining Shabbat by traditional halakha. Now that's definitely that's definitely a parallel process than what the Alter Rebbe is teaching. I'm not going to say that the Alter Rebbe would ever say that if you miss a certain amount of errors that you can do this work on just the other Averas. The other Rebbe starts with use your mind to control your heart and do everything in the Torah. So this is me teaching Tanya in the Reformed community. But I am convinced that that is beautiful and wonderful. And I'll say again that even tshuva and even halakhic life in the most traditional circumstances also involves everybody messes up something. Everybody has a barrel of mitzvahs, whether it's Lashon Hara, or it's Bitul Torah, or it's not loving another Jew like myself, or it's whatever it is. Everybody has plenty to work on. And really, although we feel like we're such a different community, we're all in the same boat. There's nobody I know that feels like I live in a Frum community. This doesn't apply to me. I get everything right. I'm full grown. I'm finished. I never mess up. Everybody is always searching their heart and is always struggling and is always, as a human, trying to figure out how to achieve more than they feel they can as a sort of flawed humans. I do believe that from the experiential perspective, we're really much more similar and connected in what we're going through than we might otherwise think. All right, beautiful work, everybody. We'll start chapter 8 next week. It's a lovely chapter, just wrapping up this topic and then getting into the topic of higher level tshuva, tshuva ila'ah. I look forward. Have a wonderful week and talk to you soon.